Hello everyone. Today I was invited by Professor Dan Shueftan. Dan Shueftan is a senior lecturer and professor at the University of Haifa. He frequently appears in both Israeli and Arab media and is a very well-known Middle East expert. Hello Dan, how are you? Morning.
Good.
Initially, before we spoke, you wanted to give some kind of introduction of your own about the situation in general, about the war and how it affects us, and from there we'll dive in.
I want to integrate this into a much broader context of the entire Zionist enterprise and say this. The crucial question when talking about a long, multi-generational conflict like our conflict with the Arab world and the environment, like the difficulties we have in both the international and internal systems, when you want to clarify an important national phenomenon that has lasted for generations and will continue for future generations, the crucial question is, in whose favor is time working? Now, of course, time doesn't work in favor of anyone. The question is what you do with your time. But we need to focus on the question of whether in every test we face, we come out of it ultimately stronger or weaker, more capable of dealing with the important needs of the Zionist enterprise of the Jewish people, or whether we are dwindling and struggling to see a more optimistic future. And I am very optimistic, and I want to explain why even the last war, even the last crisis, is part of a continuum in which we are getting stronger. The Jewish people are becoming more established in their land, in their historical homeland, in a way that if someone had seen this 100 years ago, they would have been delighted. They might not have seen a utopia where everyone is happy, everyone is peace-loving, and everyone accepts the Jewish existence, etc. But in terms of the Jews' ability not only to defend themselves, in terms of the Jewish people's ability to rebuild themselves, to create a constructive system here, to establish a more robust democracy in their state, a more pluralistic culture, more developed science, a stronger economy, and a stronger status in the world, I think they would have been very impressed. Even if we take the last war, and with your permission, I want to talk a bit about previous wars, previous confrontations, previous challenges, and say this, from every confrontation, we emerge stronger. If I go back to the Mandate period, what was the perception during the Mandate period? How did the first Zionists think we would establish ourselves here? They had an assumption that three things would happen. The Arabs would reconcile, the British would support, and the Jews would come. What turned out? The Arabs did not reconcile, the British did not support, and the Jews we wanted to come could not come. Already in 1929 it became clear to anyone with eyes in their head that the Arabs living here in this part of the Middle East, and in terms of the ability to garner broader support, would not reconcile. Therefore, the Zionist enterprise had to be maintained against their opposition. In 1939, it became clear that the British betrayed, for reasons I fully understand from a British perspective, their support for the Zionist enterprise, and instead of support without which we could not have taken the first steps. There was a British anti-Zionist policy that had to be overcome. And the main Jews who were supposed to come, millions who were supposed to come from Eastern Europe, were exterminated in the Holocaust and could not come. So a completely different policy had to be adopted, a completely different strategy, knowing that the Arabs would not reconcile, the British would not support, and the Jews would not come. Ben-Gurion adopted such a policy, and it was a policy of partitioning the land. A policy that says we Jews do not have enough to have a solid Jewish majority between the Jordan and the sea, so we need to partition the land. It's tragic, but if we want to sustain the Jewish people, we must partition the land. And Ben-Gurion decided on the partition of the land. At the end of the War of Independence, we could have in a few days conquered what was later called the West Bank, liberated all of Western Israel, and Ben-Gurion decided against it. And our ability since then to strengthen this Jewish state depends on the ability to make the right strategic decisions, and this continued in later periods. In the War of Independence, we managed to break the pan-Arab solidarity and essentially form a partnership with King Abdullah at the expense of the Palestinians and Egyptians. And thanks to this, at a very high cost, we won the War of Independence. I want to give you just a perspective. 1% of the Jewish population in Israel was killed in the War of Independence. The equivalent today would be 75,000 casualties in Israel. Imagine Israel today with 75,000 casualties. That's the proportion, compared to 6,000 casualties in the War of Independence. And we succeeded in this thanks to the partnership with Jordan, thanks to breaking the pan-Arab solidarity. If all the Arabs had acted against us in 48, we would not have been able to emerge from the war with the upper hand. In later stages, a threat that appeared in the 1950s with Gamal Abdel Nasser, who managed to unite tens of millions of Arabs from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf, and create a situation that threatened the existence of the State of Israel with the potential that all the Arabs would turn all their resources against us. First of all, we managed to deter him for 10 years following the Sinai War in 1956, to build ourselves with the infrastructure of a First World State already between 1957 and 1960, and when Nasser finally managed to rally the entire Arab world against Israel in 67 to defeat him, and then one war that lasted from June 5th, 67 until October 73, essentially the Six-Day War, the War of Attrition, and the Yom Kippur War are 3 campaigns of one war. The State of Israel managed to subdue Egypt. The goal of the State of Israel was to create a situation where the cornerstone of the pan-Arab potential against Israel, Egypt, only Egypt, could lead the entire Arab world against Israel. And there was a struggle between Israel and Egypt over who would break whom, and we broke Egypt. And the thing that the Egyptians were in no way willing to do, namely to reconcile with the State of Israel in exchange for the return of Sinai alone, not Judea and Samaria, not Jerusalem, not the Golan Heights, but only in exchange for Sinai, and even for all the territories, Egypt was not willing to reconcile with the State of Israel in a separate agreement that essentially says Egypt leaves the entire Arab world to fight Israel without its natural leader, without Egypt. Egypt broke in 79 and reached an agreement with Israel. Essentially, most of the Arab world has not fought with the State of Israel for more than 50 years, a tremendous achievement. What are we left with? We are left with the remnants of the Arab world. Who have we been fighting since? With Saddam Hussein, right, but alone, only one Arab state mobilizing against Israel, and even that in a very limited way, and various remnants of the Arab world, Palestinians, Hezbollah, Hamas, and later Iranian support. And now we are facing the entirety of Iran and the remnants of the Arab world. And first of all, we are built on the fact that the Arab world does not join Iran. Imagine Iran and Egypt and all the Arab world attacking the State of Israel. We would be in a very, very difficult situation, a critical threat to the existence of the State of Israel. What is left for Iran from the entire Arab world? The remnants, nothing. The Palestinians and Hamas and Hezbollah and Houthis and various remnants, which is a tremendous achievement, because even when the entire Arab world attacks us, it does not engage in a full-scale war with us because it knows we are so strong that we can overcome it. And now, what is happening in the last war? In the last war, essentially what is at stake is not the question of who is stronger. It is clear that Israel is stronger, but the question is whether Israel will cut Samson's hair and be in a situation where we will not be able to fight. not because we lack power against Hamas and Hezbollah and even Iranian involvement, but because progressive elements in the world will neutralize us. With your permission, I want to move on to what is happening on the global stage to explain that our enemies in this war are not only Iran and Hezbollah and all the radical elements, but also the progressive elements in the world that mobilize against us as a function of their worldview. Because essentially, what do the progressive elements in the world want? They want perfect liberalism, not liberalism that says, when I defend myself, and I will defend myself, I want not to harm innocents. That's fine. It's a liberal stance that Israelis will willingly accept, saying we will fight barbaric enemies, but not stoop to their level, not be barbaric like the Palestinians, like Hezbollah members. That's fine. A liberal who ties one hand behind their back, that's fine. What do the progressives want? That you tie the other hand as well, that you be unable to deal with your barbaric enemies because they are so barbaric that they cause you to kill their children. And that is the goal of Hamas members. The Gaza Strip was the most fortified place in human history. And it is so fortified because it is fortified not only with missiles and RPGs and an underground city beneath the entire Gaza Strip, it is fortified. Also in the New York Times and the BBC and Amnesty International and in international courts. And in radical liberals, I emphasize radical liberals. I have no problem with liberals per se. The state of Israel is a national liberal state. We call it Jewish and democratic, but it is essentially national and liberal. The problem is that the liberals listen to the progressives, and the progressives are the disaster for the liberals. Now, this is a very interesting phenomenon that exists in every field. The seemingly pure elements are the enemies of the good. The perfect is the enemy of the good, for example. If you want to be deeply rooted in the heritage of Israel and maintain a strong Jewish identity, who are your enemies? The ultra-Orthodox, because they want to be parasites, live off us, not serve in the army, not defend the Jewish people, not contribute to the economy, undermine the economy, educate their children to be primitive and not contribute in any field. And they threaten those with a Jewish identity because they are supposedly purer than... What happens in the national sphere? Who is the greatest enemy of nationalism? By the way, there are no human rights without nationalism because you need a framework of solidarity for human rights. You need a framework of solidarity for democracy to say, I am willing to pay taxes so that someone I have solidarity with does not starve. You won't do this for all the hungry people in the world. You'll do it for your own nation. And nationalism is essential for democracy and human rights. There is no democracy and human rights without nationalism. Who is the number one enemy of nationalism? Too much nationalism, fascism. Who is the number one enemy of religion? Too much religion, the ultra-Orthodox. Who is the number one enemy of liberalism? Too much liberalism, progressivism. And today we have a struggle against the progressives. What is good for the progressives is dangerous for the existence of the Jewish people. And these progressives are the ones who came to us and said, from the moment the Palestinian barbarians placed their missiles under children's homes, under hospitals, under humanitarian organization offices, etc., you have no choice but to surrender to the barbarians. You have to surrender to the barbarians because they want to force you and succeed in forcing you to harm their children. So no matter how hard we try, and we try harder than any other army in human history, even more than the Americans and the British, let alone others, Israel is still accused of committing genocide. Now, you have to be both stupid and manipulated. In other words, you have to be a Harvard student or from another good American university that brought you to a level of analytical retardation and moral distortion but this also affected liberal administrations that are not inherently anti-Israel and even pro-Israel. But from the moment civilians are harmed, and there is no war where innocents are not harmed, innocents are killed in wars, even our soldiers sometimes in friendly fire. In other words, there are terrible situations, and war is a terrible thing. But from the moment the Jews are not perfect, anti-Semitism emerges from its hiding place, and the anti-Semitism of the left joins the anti-Semitism of the right. And in this war, we had to defeat both the radicals and the progressives, more specifically Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and the elements in the world that wanted to prevent Israel from being able to decide in this war in a way that would essentially say that not only here in the Middle East, but in general, civilized people can no longer defend themselves against barbarians, because the main weapon of the barbarians is the values of the civilized people. They tell the civilized people, you don't want to be like us, and therefore you won't be able to defend yourselves. And since the beginning of Zionism, we have been looking for, and I think we have found more than anyone else, the combination of being Sparta towards our enemies and Athens towards ourselves, meaning towards our enemies, to strike them, kill them, cause them as much suffering as necessary, and on the other hand, not to become like the Palestinians, not to become like the Houthis, like the barbarians we have to fight against. And the great achievement of this war is our ability to find this combination. Therefore, and with this, I want to conclude my introduction. Our situation after the war is immeasurably better than before it. And I will give this in 3 parameters. First, on the regional level, then on the international level, and third, on the internal level. On the regional level, as a result of the war, for the first time, Israel is a regional power in the full sense of the word. We were already a regional power in terms of military, technological, and economic superiority, but we did not have political maneuverability within the Middle East. What happened during the war, what started to happen with the Abraham Accords, is that Arab states, the vast majority of Arab states, understand not only that they need to come to terms with us because we are strong, but that they cannot do without us because only we are capable of being tough and ready to fight against Iran, against radical elements, and against dangerous trends in the West at the same time. Are the Americans stronger than us? Yes. Are they more important than us? Yes. Are we much more reliable than the Americans? Because with the Americans there can also be a president like Obama, who is a disaster for any non-radical element because he helps the enemies of the United States and undermines the allies of the United States and the Arabs. Today understand this. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco and the United Arab Emirates understand that the state of Israel is not only strong enough but also determined enough, unlike the situation with the Americans, who are not always determined enough to help them deal with their 3 enemies: Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the stupidity of the Americans. Iran, it's clear why. Iran was severely damaged because we exposed its extreme vulnerabilities and also the limitations of what it can do to us. The Muslim Brotherhood, I think the destruction of Gaza, although it is a result of the fact that every house was booby-trapped and it was a military zone, but in my opinion, the fact that they understood the destruction of Gaza is an achievement, and it's not good to rebuild Gaza. It's good that throughout the Arab world they can say, if you don't want Cairo to look like Gaza, don't support the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. If you want Amman not to look like Gaza, don't support the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan. And The Muslim Brotherhood endangers both the regime in Egypt and the regime in Jordan, as well as in Saudi Arabia and Morocco and other places. It was very important to illustrate these things there. Hezbollah, we have reduced Hezbollah from a strategic threat to Israel to having no response. The IDF thought, the Israeli intelligence community and the Israeli political community thought, that we had no tolerable response to Hezbollah's strategic challenge, and Hezbollah has been reduced from a strategic threat to a major nuisance, but still a nuisance and nothing more. And no less important, Israel managed at the same time to strengthen its relations with the United States and also ignore all the American advice in the war, which if we had listened to the Americans, we would have been defeated, because we would have stopped the war early because of the hostages, and the result would have been that we would not have dealt with Hamas properly, we would not have dealt with Hezbollah at all, and we would not have harmed Iran at all. It could have been an Israeli defeat in the war if we had listened to the Americans. We listened to them in one area, which is the humanitarian aid in Gaza, and that is a huge damage, and it helps Hamas more than anything else to recover. So our regional situation in the Middle East today is much better than in the past. Public opinion hates us more. They always hated us. But the Arab regimes, in their overwhelming majority, understand again not only that they must come to terms with us, but also that they need us. But in the international arena, the progressive elements have weakened significantly, although a large part of this is not our doing. For example, in Europe, they have weakened significantly because they understood the catastrophe of mass immigration, and Europe has moved dramatically from the more crazy left to the center and to the right. And the problem was that in Europe, even right-wing chancellors implemented the policy of the radical left. And now this is changing in Europe for the better, wherever you check things. And in the United States, the madness of progressivism is being exposed, and this is reflected not only in the elections, but also in the recognition that universities are not some kind of shining beacon of light and wisdom and morality, but the opposite. This is not exposed to the entire American people, but large parts of the liberals understand this today in the United States, and the elections in the United States have also changed the trend. And one last thing, and no less important, within Israel, the national resilience of Israeli society is a Hanukkah miracle. It is one of the most wonderful things that exist, and it is especially noticeable given the fact that we have a government that does not function well. In other words, we have a society that is so strong that even without a government it knows how to stand in a long war, and the public pressure on the government is not to shorten the war because we can no longer stand it, but to go and expand the war because we do not have enough security in the northern settlements, and maybe you made a ceasefire in Lebanon too early. The Israeli public shows resilience. I want to say a lot of credit is given to the British during the Blitz. The Blitz was shorter. We absorbed 30,000 missiles during this war, and the Israeli public is steadfast. There is a level of solidarity. I am talking about the vast majority of the public. There are two parts that are not part of the solidarity, Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox. But in the vast majority of the Israeli public, there is a willingness to enlist, to contribute, to go to reserves, to pay more taxes, to contribute to the struggle, to volunteer in many areas. It is a wonderful thing. So in one last word, I would like to say, we came out of this war, like previous wars, stronger, and another proof that even a war of the kind that is most uncomfortable for us, a long war on 7 fronts against public opinion in the Western world, with division within the Israeli public as there was at the opening of the war, even in such a war, not only do we know how to stand, but after it, our situation is better than before it. What else do you ask of us, homeland? And there is still no.
Do you feel that the public in Israel today is stronger as a result of the war, despite all the protests and all the things that are now starting to resurface?
We have disagreements among us, and our disagreements are... But there is no rift in the nation. Again, if I look at the people who built this state, again, I do not include the Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox, the people who built this state, who defend it, thanks to whom it is an advanced state. These people can't stand each other but love each other at the same time. I mean, you have deep disagreements. You want to see what a divided society looks like? Go to Lebanon. You want to see what a divided society looks like? Go to the United States. Look at the Democrats and Republicans. I told them in the American Congress, you don't talk to each other. In their eyes, each one is the other. Also,
So are the high schoolers, and so is Meretz, yes.
but high schoolers and Meretz are two disgusting and repulsive phenomena. By the way, not the current Meretz, the previous Meretz. Today, Meretz together with the Democrats is nothing like the progressive Meretz was. The progressives in Israel committed electoral suicide. They barely exist today. If I look at Yair Golan, if he represents what Meretz was, we're in good shape.
But still, in terms of the split. But
I'm not interested in what's happening at the extremes. Nothing happens at the extremes. The extremes only interfere in every field. But the mainstream of Jerusalem, the right and the left, what are they arguing about today? Tell me, does anyone on the left today want to establish a Palestinian state? In the mainstream of the left? Does anyone want to? For example, are there socialists and pig capitalists in Israel? No, there aren't. There's Zimmi in the Labour Party as a joke today in the Knesset, but there are no social economic questions today. Everyone wants to take the welfare state a little to the right or a little to the left. Doesn't everyone know that Iran is our ultimate enemy? Doesn't everyone know that the Palestinians can't be trusted? Doesn't everyone know that the United States is Israel's only friend? Germany might now be getting closer to the issue. There's a very interesting phenomenon there. Even the left is not anti-Israel. This is unusual in Germany, in other places. Germany is not a business partner, no, but even the Germans, look, the Germans have changed. Their stance has changed significantly following the war in Ukraine. And the fact that even a socialist government was largely in favor of Israel is unusual. If you want to see what's happening, for example, in Norway, or what could have happened in Britain with Corbyn's Labour had it come to power, that's a completely different story, But there's no real disagreement on any real issue in the state of Israel. So what do you see as the root of the disagreement between the right and the left in Israel? Look, first of all, each side wants to take things to the extreme. I think there was a deep mistake by the entire legal group in Israel whose hunger for power, their desire to hold all the power in their hands, dragged us in one direction. And now Rothman and Yariv Levin want to take us to the other extreme. There's no doubt that the entire Israeli public can get along very well, for example, with Bougie Herzog's compromise. It's a reasonable compromise, and we will inevitably reach it. So it's supposedly all sorts of tales about a governmental revolution and a given dictatorship and all sorts of nonsense from the Kaplan Guards, which I am not impressed by. But the problem is that everyone wanted to reach the extreme. I think Rothman and Yariv Levin want to reach an unbearable extreme. I think the prosecution and the Supreme Court want to drag us in the direction where the Supreme Court controls the state of Israel. There's no difficulty in finding a reasonable compromise, and we will inevitably reach it. You'll see right now it's convenient for each side to rally their base with extreme positions. Yes, but it's not a disagreement. Israeli democracy is more robust than American democracy. I think most Americans would agree with us today on this issue. Israeli democracy is super robust. I'm not worried about it at all. There are things I agree with and there are things I don't agree with, and we tend to express ourselves in extremes. But we have a level of solidarity that without it, we wouldn't withstand this war. We are enduring a long, difficult war on many fronts that reaches each of us at home. It could have reached us directly by buses to our homes, and we are enduring it in an astonishing way. If you'll allow me a joke on this subject, one day God got fed up with humanity and decided to bring a flood, but a real flood, without Noah, without an ark, without a dove leaf, without an olive leaf, a real flood. Then he calls the three leaders of the monotheistic religions and tells them each to tell their people that in 2 weeks the world will cease to exist. The Christian tells his people, listen, we have sinned. Let's do good deeds. Pray. Maybe he will relent. The Muslim says it's not us, it's colonialism, it's imperialism, it's the occupation. The Jew says, guys, we have 2 weeks to learn how to live underwater. That's the state of Israel. We learn to live underwater. We do reserve duty. Look at what the reserves tell us today about the state of Israel. And there you want to tell me there's a right and left, and they sit and argue in Gaza or Lebanon about the reserve issue in the judiciary. It could have happened. If it really happened, we wouldn't be able to fight. There's a disagreement, and besides, look, I know what happens when I drive. I open the window and tell the driver next to me at the traffic light what I think about his mother and her intimate parts and so on. I'm boiling and then I calm down, and in the end we can go have coffee together. We thought there would be an ethnic war in Israel. I was too young. Others remember the 1981 elections. The elections where we thought there would be a war between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim. What happened? Mixed marriages to such an extent that you have more than 1 million children who no longer know if they are Ashkenazim or Mizrahim. Think about what we thought would happen when there were great tensions. There are tensions, we love to shout at each other, but in the end, when we are put to the test, look at the national resilience of the state of Israel today. So how do you explain it? I explain it because we continue the Jewish tradition of disagreements. We are an unpleasant people. We are a people that lives in disagreements. I'll tell you more than that. I am a staunch secularist. Not only do I not observe the 6 to 13 commandments, but even regarding the 10 commandments, I am very selective. But I love the Bible dearly. I read it all the time. Do you know what the Bible is? I want to give you a summary of the Bible. It's God complaining about the Jews, how they behave. I am their God. And the Jews come and say, who made you God? And God says, you made me God. And all the time you sin and all the time you do evil in the eyes of the Lord. Isn't that a large part of the Bible? What do you have in the New Testament? There everything is fine, everyone was sinners, then they became righteous, and it's a boring story. Another death, we argue. What's the name? Where does the name Israel come from? Israel with God, we argue, so we don't see each other. The Jewish people prove resilience in almost impossible conditions throughout their history. The Jewish people prove creativity in all possible conditions, including in the state of Israel. You know, there were people who were afraid of the Zionist enterprise. Very serious people said all Jewish creativity, people like Freud, like Marx, etc., they were marginal people. They were secular in a religious society. They were Jews in a Christian society. What will happen when there is military parades and value-added tax? How will the state of Israel look at the creativity of the state of Israel? It's a top national priority. The Jewish people succeeded in establishing a state. We talked earlier about the combination of Sparta externally and Athens internally. Could you imagine after 2,000 years that Israelis excelled in the military field? I gave a lecture in the German Bundestag, the German parliament, a few months ago, and I said, pay attention to an interesting thing. Today, Berlin can only be defended from a Holocaust with Jewish weapons. They bought the Arrow 3. Look where we are. So we're not pleasant. We're not a pleasant people. We're not a sympathetic people, but we're a challenging people. I was a professor for 2 years at one of the best universities in the world in Washington. It was so pleasant that I went crazy. I couldn't stand it. I had to come from time to time and get a little rudeness intravenously directly into my veins. We are capable of dealing with problems. I want to remind you of one thing. With all their wars, when the State of Israel was established, we were 6% of the Jewish people after the Holocaust. Actually, only 4% of the Jewish people before the Holocaust. Now, since then, we are 46% of the Jewish people. And inevitably, we will be the absolute majority of the Jewish people for a simple reason. The only place where there is still a large Jewish community, there is also assimilation and few children. Here we have many children, even without the ultra-Orthodox, also without the ultra-Orthodox, many children, and there is no assimilation. The Jewish people are coming to Zion. If someone, when this idea was raised 150 years ago, it sounded like a crazy idea. Look at all the nations that tried to return to their original language. For example, the Irish tried to return to their language, and in the end they found the language of the people they hate the most, the British. The revival of the Hebrew language, the fact that we speak Hebrew, the fact that I can read the Bible without translation, we speak the same language, the fact that almost every idiom, almost every image we use today has biblical roots. Can you imagine someone else? These achievements are not a function of pleasant and calm people, but of stormy people. And stormy people also argue stormily. So,
what makes someone right-wing or left-wing in the state of Israel? According to this survey, it's really close and similar in all of us, roughly.
look, I think both the right and the left in Israel have managed to work together under very difficult conditions, not only against external enemies, but also under immense tension. Think about the religious aspect. There was almost no connection between the Jewish communities in the diaspora in the East and the West. It's not a given that you bring everyone here and there. We weren't a functioning people. We had a shared story. We all considered ourselves descendants of people with a shared story. But that's it. We had to create a nation here. Ben-Gurion used a somewhat extreme expression. He said human dust. I think we were human dust when we arrived here. That's an exaggeration. Ben-Gurion liked to exaggerate. It was useful. But we were a conglomerate. A conglomerate is a mixture of trees, stones, mud, all glued together. It's not a magmatic rock. We were a conglomerate due to intermarriage, which is the term for mixed marriages on a massive scale. We solved one of the problems. Can you imagine blacks and whites in the United States reaching such a level of integration as we have? Why?
Is there no solidarity today, broadly speaking, in the United
States between blacks and whites? Ask Black Lives Matter. It will show what's happening. I
look at work in progress, but I don't just look at it plainly without
any context. Take the crucial question of mixed marriages in Israel on a massive scale.
But even in Israel, I would say it's more, let's say, for Mizrahim. So what?
So it will take another 50 years. So what? By the way, You like to look, as you said earlier, at merits and the hilltop youth. Leave the extremes, leave the despair.
No, but
If you take the large populations, look at the Ethiopian immigration. It came at a relatively late stage from a very difficult background. But I assume, I have no certainty, but I assume that in another 20 years, in another 50 years, it will look different. The integration between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim didn't come immediately at the beginning of the state because they came from very, very different backgrounds.
if we talk about Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, in the end it's communities, but right-left ideologies are a different story, maybe not.
Ideologies are much easier. Look at the critical debates today between right and left. You know what? Even about Judea and Samaria, the debate is only about what will happen in the end times, which no one expects to pass in the near future. Hasn't the tension between right and left dramatically decreased since the 90s? In the 90s, a large part of the public, even a small majority of the public, thought that in the years we were going to reach peace with the Palestinians. I'm a very rare case of a person who longs to leave the Gaza Strip and a large part of Judea and Samaria and still opposed Oslo because I knew there was no partner. There was no partner, and there will be no partner in the foreseeable future unless the Palestinians undergo a process of Norwegianization, which I don't think is on the horizon. Where are the big divisions? It's convenient for every party towards its base to say, if the other side comes to power, it will be disastrous. What do all the parties say? What do all the politicians say? If I'm not in power, democracy is in danger. That's what the left says today about the right, and that's what the right will say about the left if the left is in power. If a politician says something, the assumption is you shouldn't take it too seriously. I also suggest another thing. If the press focuses on governance, it's not interesting because they focus on anecdotes, they focus on all kinds of trivialities, on matters that are negligible, not even marginal, but negligible. So,
What is interesting?
the fundamental questions, what are we facing here? What is the nature of this war? If someone thinks the nature of this war is to ask what happens as a result of the occupation, then they are a fool. Fortunately, these people have committed electoral suicide. There's a cult called the Haaretz cult. It's okay. In a democratic country, it's allowed to have cults. Some are called Lev Tahor. Some are called Haaretz. There are different cults, and that's okay, and I have no problem with that. But what Haaretz says today, or much of what Haaretz said in the 90s, a large part of the Jewish public said because there was no second intifada yet, and there was no last war yet, and we hadn't learned what we needed to learn already in 21 and 29. 100 years ago, we should have learned this. There are no big disagreements. Today we can come to a common agenda that is accepted by a very large majority of the Israeli public.
You said earlier something about the impact of the war in Europe being around progressiveness work and somehow influencing, and then you added something about it causing anti-Semitism to come out of the obligation. Yes, no.
No, the anti-Semitism of the left is more dangerous than the anti-Semitism of the right. The anti-Semitism of the right is brutal, it's violent, you immediately see there's a danger. The anti-Semitism of the left delegitimizes the Jewish people's right to be like any other people. Look, I'll give you an interesting phenomenon. If you talk to a progressive, they'll explain to you that every Oompa Loompa, every invented nation has the right to self-determination, but the Jews have to explain. And if they established a state, they didn't establish a state because they have the right to self-determination like any other people, not according to the Jewish perception, but according to the liberal universal perception. The Jews have the right, like any other people, to establish a state. if they established a state, it's because we Europeans did them a favor to compensate for the Holocaust, and therefore, thanks to us, they established a state. And if they established a state thanks to us, then they need to behave nicely, because if they don't behave nicely, then we need to ask whether the state of Israel has the right to exist. Now, the great success of Zionism is that I can come to Europeans, and when they ask me whether Israel has the right to exist, I laugh. I tell them, you know what? Try to take away our right to exist. Who are you to address this issue? But the anti-Semitic element that says what is obvious to every nation, the Jews, in the best case, need to explain. And in another case, for example, Jews are not allowed to defend themselves, while others are. For example, if the Americans burn Tokyo, I'm not even talking about Nagasaki and Hiroshima, burning Tokyo, burning Berlin. And it's good they burned Berlin, and it's good they burned Hamburg, and it's good they burned Tokyo. Because if you have a barbaric people that brings forth a barbaric regime, you will also harm the people. And even if you have precise weapons, try to kill only guilty people. But if something is harmed around, then if, for example, the Palestinian people as a collective, maybe not every individual Palestinian, but the Palestinian people as a collective support terror. For them, the only role model for Palestinians is someone who killed only Jews, and the more Jews you killed, the more exemplary you are, and the more money you'll get, and the more respect your family will receive. And if there's a sick people in the deep sense of the word, and the Palestinian people are a sick people in two senses. First, in their entire national body, there's not a single constructive bone. They build nothing. When they receive billions of dollars, they invest every cent in corruption, in weapons, in violence. That's what they have. Corruption, violence, and whining. That's the Palestinian people. That's what they do. Is every Palestinian like that? No, I can tell you on the personal friendship level, I have a former Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, who is a nation builder. And not coincidentally, even when he was Prime Minister, he had 2% support among the Palestinian people. The Americans made him Prime Minister with the help of $500 million. And when in Gaza they are practically given an independent state of their own, what do they do with billions of dollars? Shimon Peres, in his folly, said Gaza would be Singapore, and we just leave, it will be Singapore. I told him, Shimon, you didn't hear well. Someone said Singapore, you heard Singapore. What are you babbling about? There are no Singaporeans sitting there. I know Singapore. Singaporeans are a productive people. The Palestinians are a people that is flawed in these two senses. They are flawed in that there is no constructive component in their national rise, and they are flawed in that their only role model is people who murdered Jews. What makes one people constructive and another
One.
a revolution in the opposite direction, a revolution in the direction of the Muslim Brotherhood? In Singapore, there was a cultural revolution. In Korea, in Taiwan, and of course, Zionism is the most prominent example. After all, what is Zionism? Zionism is essentially a rebellion against the rabbinical leadership of Zionism, of the Jewish people, which said, let's wait for the Messiah. And Zionism said, we will return to our homeland, and we will not wait for the Messiah. In a certain sense, it's not an exact definition, but we are the miracle. The miracle is not that we will sit passively and wait for miracles. We, those who want to see it in faith terms, in my opinion, can say a miracle was done for us by the Holy One. Blessed be He who brought us. That's Ben Gurion.
That is, I don't know if you know the song We Are Carrying Torches. Do you know it? What is said there? A miracle did not happen to us. We did not find a jar of oil. We walked in the valley. We ascended the mountain. We discovered hidden springs of light. We dug with a plough, and there was light.
They say there, and anyone whose heart is thirsty for light will lift his eyes and heart to us, to the light, and come. We are the light. A person of faith can come and say, the Holy One, blessed be He, brought us a generation that brought us redemption. That's perfectly fine. It's not only a legitimate approach, I also have some affinity for this approach, but it's a revolution.
To come and say the Jewish people are returning to the homeland, the Jewish people are taking their fate into their own hands, as stated in the Declaration of a People standing on its own authority. That's what we want it to be.
And here, look,
Mizrahim and Europeans, religious and secular, people with right-wing and left-wing worldviews come together, and because of that build the Jewish people, bringing the Jewish people to their land.
that's it. Zionism not only succeeded in creating a Jewish state here, it succeeded in bringing the Jewish people here. Now, part of the Jewish people fled here because they had nowhere else to go. But they can leave. They can easily leave. They have foreign passports. I also have a foreign passport. I can sit anywhere I want in Europe tomorrow. God forbid. I'm not willing to do that. We have the skills. They want us everywhere in the world. Emigration from Israel is very small. The vast majority of people, even those who came here not by choice, stayed here by choice. That's a huge achievement. It's a revolution. And it's a culture. And what the progressives did to us, they made the discussion about culture illegitimate. The moment you mention the word culture, they claim you're a racist. If you don't understand culture, you don't understand human behavior.
Okay, so I want to clarify this point about the progressives. Is it because they are progressives and that's their perception of the woke? Or is it anti-Semitism?
No, the source is not anti-Semitic. The source is a combination of several things, in my opinion. First of all, people who have an unconscious frustration from the fact that the problems have no solution. So what do they say? If we say the problem is with us, then there's a solution because we will change. We blame ourselves for everything. They
Don't say the problem is with us.
No. They say, first of all, the problem is with them. Those who are anti-Israel in the US are also anti-American. They also disdain the US. They also claim that all the peoples in the world have the right to work in the US with claims. They also claim that anyone with pigments in their skin is automatically right because we oppress them. With colonialism, imperialism, slavery, everything, they don't take into account that Western culture is not the first culture to institute slavery, but the first culture to abolish slavery. Thanks to Western civilization, which they are so ashamed of, there is no slavery. That means everything good in the world, according to their own version, is a function of Western culture. But they can't stand themselves. They have a constant need for guilt feelings. The moment someone behaves like a barbarian, then I'm to blame that he's a barbarian because I treated him badly and he had a tough childhood, so...
You're saying they have a need to blame themselves because they can change themselves?
Yes, but we are the ultimate selves. Look, we Jews are the culture. The white, the ultimate European or American. Look at public opinion, for example, in the United States. Students, mainly young people, say that Jews are white. Can you be optimistic? Why are Jews white? Because the white Semite and the Jews are certainly Semitic. So who is anti-Semitic today? It's a combination of three things. The very extreme right, the Arabs and Muslims in Western countries and in their own countries, and part not only of the extreme left, but also part of the less extreme, more mainstream left, some of which also due to those progressive components. The problem with the progressives is that they manage to convince the liberals that because they are not progressive, they are not liberal enough. And this happens in the other two examples I mentioned, also ultra-Orthodox versus Torah observant Jews who are productive and contribute a lot, who say, wait, maybe their connection is better, Mehadrin is better. In my opinion, the nationalists need to protect themselves from the fascists, the liberals need to protect themselves from the progressives, and Torah-observant Jews need to protect themselves from parasitic ultra-Orthodox, not from someone who wants to live an ultra-Orthodox lifestyle, serve in the IDF, work and pay taxes. I have no problem with him. My great-grandfather, his grave was recently found in Germany. Today it's Poland, but it was Germany. On the tombstone, it's written in German and Hebrew, and in Hebrew it says all his life he lived by the work of his hands. He didn't disturb us from studying Torah. All his life he lived by the work of his hands. If you don't work, you have no right to get up in the morning. You
say the enemy of the good is the perfect, and you made a legal argument that the enemy of nationalism is ultra
nationalism because
it's Ben Gvir, yes.
Look, because the balance. The internal balance between nationalism and liberalism, in which Zionism, a Jewish and democratic state, look, if you take any value to its end, you might lose another positive value. For example, you'll agree with me that there are two things that are very important to each of us: privacy and security. At the airport, you and I completely give up privacy. We say you are allowed to search not only my luggage, but even my body, right? At my home, I sanctify privacy, and I say, even if someone comes to me and says that the fight against crime will be more efficient if everyone has a listening device at home and the police and family sit and listen, I say, guys, no. What do? What does a healthy democratic society do? It tries to find a balance and say privacy is important, security is important. Where is security more important? Where is privacy more important? How do we best combine the democratic and Jewish components of the State of Israel? And there is a legitimate debate, for example, public transportation on Shabbat, yes or no? I am very much in favor of yes. Someone will come and say, no, I understand him. I don't agree with him, but I understand him. It's a legitimate debate between people who want a Jewish state. And then that person tells me I want there to be no public desecration of Shabbat by state institutions. Okay, so I oppose him on the issue of public transportation on Shabbat and support him on kosher food in the IDF. Yes. Because I say, okay, we all sit in the IDF at the same table. I don't mind eating kosher. I do mind eating non-kosher. Fine. But we are looking for balance. Anyone who places one value system in such a way that it suppresses the other value system is, in my opinion, either not a partner or, in extreme cases, also an enemy. But first of all, not a partner. You and I don't know each other. We met an hour ago for the first time. I'm sure we can agree on serving in the IDF, on the need to work. I agree on the need for kosher in the army. We both love Jewish sources and want the state of Israel to be a Jewish state, not in the religious sense of the word. We are a people. We are the Jewish people. Okay. And you mentioned it earlier, the giving of the Torah was after we were already a people. And we succeeded, not only need to, but succeeded in finding a formula. You and I can have disagreements, but can there be a rift? Can there be a rift? I think not. There can be, but we won't let it happen. I won't let it happen, and you won't let it happen. Back then,
During the reform before the war, when there were really sharp talks.
so you had a few tens of thousands of people who were burning with it, fine.
And the entire media.
The media, but it influences, yes, but the media influences in a very, very marginal way. Look, if the media had influence, then the left would be in power constantly in the state of Israel. If the media had influence, then Trump wouldn't have been elected. So
How do you explain that?
I explain it because people have a healthy distrust of the media, but it seems
To me, that this distrust in the media is the result of many years of the media being corrupt.
really the media has been prostituted, really prostituted. Today there are very few journalists who come to tell you what's happening, trying to be objective. They sometimes don't succeed, but trying. And the vast majority simply come to forcefully push their agenda on you.
To say that at least the objective ones are those who admit their side, no.
No, but first of all, admitting your side is important. But first of all, try to say sensible things, because only then will you gain trust. When journalists come to me, look, when I watch Channel 14, I have no trust in them. Recently, not even in Channel 12. Now, you have a few individuals on Channel 12 whom I trust, and those who shape Channel 12, I don't trust because they do pure propaganda. So I have propaganda from here and propaganda from there. There are very few journalists who try. Now, even if you try, you won't succeed in neutralizing your worldview, but give me something I can learn from. Today, when I hear the news, in a large part of the cases, I mute it to silence everything, because I know what this chatterbox says 10 times a day, every day for months, and it's complete nonsense. Now, if someone says something I disagree with, but it's interesting, I'm happy to listen. I'm very happy to listen, but the profession of journalism has been prostituted all over the world. The New York Times, the BBC, CNN, these are propaganda machines, yes? Now, I have no greater empathy for right-wing propaganda machines than for left-wing propaganda machines. How
Greater empathy for propaganda machines that admit their side. That is, if I come and say I belong, I'm left, I'm Haaretz, I'm left, what you get is left, he seems honest to me. On the other hand, someone who says I
don't care if he's honest or not, I care if I can learn something from it. If there's a commentator I strongly disagree with, but I can learn from, then how?
Do you consume news?
I listen and I selectively decide. First of all, I switch between many tools all the time. And secondly, I know specifically, personally, whom to listen to and whom not to. And every month I listen again to someone I don't usually listen to see if maybe they've come to their senses. And in the vast majority of cases, no. And there are cases where yes. Look, I can tell you that in Germany, I had a very interesting phenomenon happen to me. For years, they called me Mr. Retro in Germany because they said you belong to the early 20th century. You're talking to us about barbaric Russians, about wars in Europe. What are you talking about? After what happened in Ukraine, there are many people in Germany I talk to who tell me 3 of them told me almost the same words. In recent years, I've been forced to rethink everything I grew up with. He says, oops, it doesn't sound right, but if I'm not selective, I'll waste my time. I move to a wide range of sources. By the way, I listen very carefully to propaganda when I want to know which propaganda Hamas chose, which propaganda Putin chose, which propaganda a certain entity chose, because it explains to me his policy. It explains to me what he is trying to sell to his own public.
It's not related to the Israeli media.
Even in the Israeli media, I occasionally read Haaretz to hear what's accepted in the Haaretz readers' circle. And even in Haaretz, there are sometimes excellent articles, right? Rarely, but there are. I rely on my friends. They point out to me those who truly have content beyond simplistic propaganda. So I'm interested in listening. By the way, there are people who, as journalists, report very well, and I trust them. But as commentators, they're chatterboxes I don't listen to. But they're honest enough to also present the perspective they don't agree with.